Okay, stop me if you've heard this before. You can't win your league on draft day, but you can lose it. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's true. In fact, I've already shown you how somebody with a completely horrible draft could turn it around and make the playoffs and almost win the league. That's a video you should definitely watch. But besides that, I can tell you that there are definitely some things you can do right and some things you can do very wrong on draft day. Let's avoid those mistakes. And here are the three big ones I want to tell you about. The first one is pretty straightforward. Don't go after starting pitching or any pitching too early. Now, the prevailing wisdom on this theory has changed. It's been very much in flux the last few years. There not that long ago, there was the pocket ace strategy where you just nail those two early studs at starting pitching and then you just wait till later. And then now it's like, well, I don't even want any pitching early because they're all risky. I'm in that camp. I'm going to say I don't want a starting pitcher in my first 3, 4, maybe 5 rounds. Now, it's not that I don't want those starting pitchers. I just don't want them at that ADP. There's no way I'm taking a chance on even a Tariq Skubal or Paul Skeens in round 1. Sounds crazy now, but let's look at just last year. Okay, the only guy who's going in the first round on average was Spencer Strider, and we know how that turned out. Okay, injuries happen, except that injuries tend to happen more often to pitchers who throw extremely hard and fast, and Spencer Strider is one of those, and he's already had it happen before a couple years ago, so it really wasn't that surprising. In fact, let's just run through the first 10 pitchers that were drafted last season in terms of ADP. Okay, after Strider was Corbin Burns and Zach Wheeler, and they actually turned out to be pretty solid picks. I mean, they were top 10 in terms of return on investment for starting pitcher. So those were fine. And then SP4 was Luis Castillo. He finished as the SP28 on the season. Number 5, Kevin Gausman. You know how disappointing he was early in the season, wound up as the SP34 in terms of total fantasy points. I'm using the Yahoo scoring system here. SP6 was Pablo Lopez, finished as SP17. You could have done better waiting. Sandy Alcantara was next. We know how that turned out. Basically missed the entire season. Number 8 was Zach Gallen. He finished 50th among starting pitchers in terms of fantasy points. Number 9 was Yoshinobu Yamamoto. He missed some time too, finished as the SP 101 overall. And then number 10 was Tyler Glasnow, finished 39th. What do all these disappointing players have in common? They're pitchers. The bottom line is you just don't need to have one of the first starting pitchers off the board. You can get comparable value in the mid rounds. Just it's not worth it. Secure your infield, your outfield first, and then go after pitching. Mistake number 2 is ignoring injury red flags. And there are certain players who are just waving that red flag big and loud and proud. And sometimes we just don't want to see it. One group is the former superstar, and I say former because look, let's just face it. Mike Trout, as good as he still may be with the bat, it doesn't matter if he can't stay on the field. I'm not drafting him at all, period. I'm done. How many times do we have to see this? Christian Yelich, that back, is it ever going to get better? I don't think so, and I'm not willing to find out. And then there are young players who maybe haven't had the extended history of IL stints. Even if you know it's coming, you want to pretend it's not. Hello, Royce Lewis. And look, I drafted Royce Lewis quite a bit last year. I will still draft Royce Lewis this year now that he's going at a reasonable ADP, but even then, I'm just expecting that he might get hurt at some point. And then do you really want to bet on a rebound from veterans like a Justin Verlander, a Jordan Romano, guys like this? And although we haven't even seen him in the majors yet, Roki Sasaki is one of those players I'm going to pretty much steer clear of because this feels like an injury waiting to happen. I will say this, there are some players who miss extended time, maybe even the entire season because of an injury, and they get kind of unfairly pegged as injury prone, but there are some players who just, it continues to happen. I'll even throw Ozzy Albies in that group because it's been several times he is missed with different injuries. You got to really do your homework. Don't just stick to the narrative of what you heard or the impression that you get of a player, whether he's injury prone or not. So I look at my baseball forecaster. It's got a whole section here that talks about risk management, gives each player a grade. And you'd be surprised some players who are graded out poorly that you may not even realize. And sure, anybody can get hurt, whether they have previously or not. But let's face it, some players are just more likely to. Now, mistake number 3, You might think I'm contradicting myself based on what I just finished saying, but I think it's a mistake to play it too safe on draft day. Now, obviously, you don't want to take a player that you feel might get injured because that wouldn't make sense. But at the same time, you can't be completely scared off of players because, for example, the last, I don't know, 5 years in a row, I was saying I don't want to touch Chris Sale. I want no part of him. And if you drafted Chris Sale last year, then you were doing backflips. So sure, I whiffed on him. That's fine. I don't think I'll draft him again this year because I still feel like he's another re-injury waiting to happen. But I was all in on a guy like, let's say, Garrett Crochet, who had never been a starter before, and we didn't think the White Sox would be historically bad, but we knew they weren't going to be good. But him as their opening day starter, turning into an ace. I loved Garrett Crochet preseason. I took him in a couple of leagues, and I'm glad. Ronaldo Lopez, another guy that there were a lot of questions about him joining the rotation there in Atlanta, paid off huge. And while a lot of young hitters were basically busts last year, guys like Jackson Holiday, but then you had the Jackson Merrills who had great seasons, and those who actually invested a somewhat early pick on LA De La Cruz, that paid off. So ultimately, I guess my advice is to balance your risk, right, with your potential reward. So you don't want to make some obviously bad picks, but you've got to take some chances because let's face it, after draft day, you're not going to wind up with maybe even half of the players you draft by season's end. You're going to have to, if you want to win at least, play the waiver wire, make some trades, and be active. So you don't have to draft a perfect team. Take smart chances on potential league winning picks. And I'll just throw in a bonus one here now that I think about it. This isn't really a draft day mistake, but I think it's a mistake after your draft has finished up is to get too attached to your team. I would all like to think that we had the perfect draft or, every pick was great. You're going to like all these players. Everything's going to go great. It's not. Don't get attached to a player just because you drafted them. Once the season starts, you're going to have to throw out the window where you drafted them, what you thought of them. You've got to look at the here and the now, and you've got to assess them objectively. But again, it's all about balance. You have to weigh being patient with being proactive, and you're just going to have to make the right decision, which is why every week I'm going to give you advice in terms of waiver wire pickups, trade maneuvers, and all of that. Now, you remember back at the beginning, I talked about drafting a horrible team and still making the playoffs. That was my partner, Chris. He did it his first year ever playing fantasy baseball, got auto drafted, the worst team that you could imagine, and still managed to make the playoffs. You want to know why? Well, actually, we broke it down in detail. Here's what you could do to help win during the season after your draft.